Meet Kevin. He's on summer vacation and he's going trekking in the lower Himalayan ranges. It's a hot day and he has been walking for hours already.
I am so thirsty.
Kevin has only one small bottle of water. He needs to make it last the whole day, so he has to be careful. Like Kevin, we all need to be careful while using our natural resources. Our planet Earth offers us several resources such as forests, minerals, water and soil on which we are dependent for many of our needs. Like Kevin's bottle of water, these resources will also get depleted if we are not careful about how we use them. In this lesson, we are going to look at some natural resources, particularly forest resources, and figure out why they are important to sustain. By the end of this lesson, you will be able to describe how our natural resources are being depleted and why they need to be preserved, explain the significance of forest resources, explain the importance of sustainable development, and describe what we as individuals can do to help conserve and manage forest resources.
Why do we need to use our resources carefully?
Our resources are limited, and the number of people who need them is increasing steadily because of the growth in global population. That is why we need to be very careful about how we use our resources. Unknowingly, we are exploiting our natural resources, including our forest, water, coal, and petroleum reserves. For example, the river Ganges runs its course of over 2,500 kilometers from Gangotri in the Himalayas to the Bay of Bengal. In the towns and cities of Uttar Pradesh, Bihar, and West Bengal, garbage and excreta are dumped into the river while it flows through. Largely untreated sewage is dumped into the Ganges every day. In addition, human activities like bathing, washing of clothes, and immersion of ashes or unburnt corpses contribute to the pollution of the Ganges. The toxicity created in the water by these activities kills aquatic fauna. Even industries cause pollution because of the large amount of slag which is discarded as a byproduct of industries. The coliform bacteria is usually found in the human intestine, whose presence in the Ganges water indicates contamination by feces and disease-causing microorganisms. This graph shows the total coliform count levels in the Ganges that quantifies the pollution in units, called the most probable number or MPN. To overcome the poor quality of water, in 1985, the Ganga Action Plan came into existence. Pollution of the Ganges is just one example of how our resources are being depleted. Let's join Kevin, who is trekking in the Himalayas, and talk about our forest resources. Forests are biodiversity hotspots due to the sheer number as well as the variety of species of flora and fauna that live in them. And these very forests provide us a wealth of resources. The depletion of our forest resources is another issue that we need to be aware of. Our dependency on forest resources varies. The people who use forest produce are called stakeholders. These stakeholders include people who live in or around forests, or the villagers, the forest department of the government, which owns the land, industrialists who use various forest produce, nature enthusiasts who lobby to conserve nature as it is, and of course, all of us, you and me, are stakeholders too. After all, these forests also belong to us. Let's take a closer look at how some of these people depend on forest resources. The people living in or near forests use the wood for fuel, bamboo to thatch their houses, and to make baskets, leaves for fodder, herbs for medicines, and fruits and nuts from forests for their food. They also let animals like sheep and cows graze in the forests. Sometimes, vast tracts of forests are converted into monocultures of pine, teak, or eucalyptus. In order to plant trees, huge areas are first cleared of vegetation. This destroys a large amount of biodiversity in the area. It is the responsibility of the forest department to manage all forest resources. They own forest land and set up rules and regulations for the use of forest resources. They also ensure that the local people and their needs are not ignored. It is also one of their duties to make people understand how to manage forests. Industries obtain raw material from forests for their factories. Forests support vital industries such as rubber, lac, and sports equipment. We use the timber from trees for construction, doors, and window frames and furniture. All the paper that we use also comes from trees. Nature and wildlife enthusiasts, who are in no way dependent on the forests, help to conserve resources. They mainly concentrate on large animals like lions, tigers, elephants, and rhinoceroses. However, they now also recognize the need to preserve biodiversity as a whole. Our forest resources are limited. Indiscriminate use can deplete them to dangerously low levels. That's why the villagers try and take good care of them by using only twigs and branches from trees instead of cutting down trees, taking only what is needed, taking animals to graze in the forests. Without the animals, the grass would grow so much that new grass wouldn't get a chance to grow. Villagers make the government realize that they are also a really important part of the forest. Villagers' interests lie in conserving the forests rather than destroying them. Let's see few instances of villagers intervening for the conservation of forests. The Chipko Andolan, Hug the Trees movement, was the result of alienation of people from their forests. This movement originated in the 1970s in a village called Reni in Garhwal, high up in the Himalayas. There was a dispute between the local villagers and a contractor who wanted to cut trees in a forest close to the village. As the contractor's workers reached the forest, the women of the village wrapped themselves around the tree trunks, preventing the workers from cutting the trees. Thus, the contractor had to withdraw. This movement forced the government to rethink the destruction of forests affected not only the availability of forest products, but also the quality of the soil and the sources of water. In 1972, the West Bengal government recognized its failure in reviving the degraded Saul forests. A.K. Banerjee, a forest officer, along with the local villagers, was involved in saving over 1,200 acres of badly degraded Saul forests. The villagers helped and got incentives from the government in return. As a result of these efforts, the once worthless forests were later valued at Rs 12.5 crores. The Bishnoi community in Rajasthan conserved the forest and wildlife as a religious tenet. The Government of India has recently instituted an Amrita Devi Bishnoi National Award for Wildlife Conservation in the memory of Amrita Devi Bishnoi, who in 1731 sacrificed her life along with 363 others for the protection of khejri trees in the Khejrali village near Jodhpur in Rajasthan. Without the participation of villagers, the forests also suffer. For example, the Great Himalayan National Park contains alpine meadows which were grazed by sheep in the summer. Nomadic shepherds drove their flock up from the valleys every summer to feed their sheep. When this national park was formed, this practice was put to an end. Now, without the regular grazing by sheep, the tall grass prevents fresh growth.
There's some sort of factory there. Let's go take a look.
Can you see the forest land there? The factory has used up all the trees in this area. Imagine what would happen if they kept doing this and ultimately finished all the trees here.
They would just move on to a different forest, I guess.
That's true. But without the cover of trees, the soil in this forest would soon get eroded, leaving no more room for more trees to grow. Secondly, without the trees, wildlife dependent on the trees and forest cover would no longer survive. It's not just the number, but the variety of species of trees, plants and animals that are found in the forest that is important. It is this biodiversity that is so valuable. Losing this diversity can lead to loss of ecological stability here. And let's not forget the people who live here. If they didn't have this forest, where would they get their food and firewood from? Where would their animals graze? If this continues, there will be nothing left for future generations in this area.
What's the alternative? After all, these industries that use the forests are important.
We don't have to stop using forest resources, but we do need to make sure that we're giving back what we're taking away from the forests. Industries releasing hazardous waste must have a plan for the disposal of wastes. Pollutants should be minimized and wastes must be recycled. The government has made it a rule that all industries that use raw materials from a forest must have the responsibility to plant more trees than they chop. Industries must pay the government fairly for these resources so that the money can be used for development work and for the benefit of the local people.
Does that mean that we all play a role in keeping the forests safe?
That's right, Kevin. All stakeholders, including the industries, the government, and the local people, have to work hand in hand.
There's just so much to think about. I'm glad I came trekking here. I wonder if I would have realized all this otherwise.
You're right. Sustainable development is not only about using the resources we have. It also ensures that they are equitably distributed. All stakeholders should benefit, not just the rich who control the industries or powerful government officials. All the stakeholders together help in sustainable management. The government, which owns the forest land, has some clear responsibilities. The government controls the industries to use the resources in limited quantities. It also has to set up rules and regulations for how these industries should operate, dispose their waste material, and so on. It has to ensure that local people are not marginalized, that they also benefit from available resources. The government has to ensure that illegal activity in forests is controlled, so that the resources do not fall into the wrong hands. Industries also have a role to play in conserving our forest resources. Some important responsibilities they have include planting more trees than they use or reforesting, following all government norms to prevent pollution, developing and following ways to dispose the waste from their factories safely, and lastly, paying a fair price for the resources that they use. Even you as an individual are a stakeholder in conserving our forests. There are a lot of things you can do to help conserve our resources. You must have heard of the 3 R's: reduce, reuse, and recycle. Use less. Switch off lights and fans when you're not in the room. Avoid wasting anything you use, including food and other items of daily use. Recycle paper, plastic, glass, metal, and other materials. Reuse what you can, such as plastic bags, glass, and plastic jars, the reverse side of used paper, and so on. Remember, all these small steps make a difference if we all follow them.
Hi, I'm KK. Let me tell you a little bit about myself. Life doesn't exist without water. Water forms the basic raw material for metabolic processes to happen. Apart from supporting life, water is used for agriculture, industries, drinking, cooking, bathing, and cleaning. You can see how much of the total available water is used for these activities.
This lesson is about the management of water and coal resources. At the end of this lesson, you will be able to explain the importance of water resource management, explain various methods of water resource management and their advantages and disadvantages, explain the importance of managing our coal and petroleum resources, list some alternative energy sources that can reduce our dependence on limited coal and petroleum resources, describe your role as an individual in conserving energy derived from limited resources.
Water is important for many diverse activities. Let me give you an idea of how much water we actually use for some basic activities. As you can see, our need and use of water is huge. There is so much water available in the world, but only a small fraction of it is usable. This may pose as a challenge. The rainfall pattern in India differs in different geographical regions. Tropical regions receive more rainfall compared to desert regions. Rains in India are largely due to the monsoons, which come only for few months, generally between June and September. To understand water availability better, let's take a look at the water cycle. The water of aquatic bodies evaporates in the sunlight. The resulting water vapor condenses into clouds. Air currents move these clouds towards land, and water eventually falls back as rain and snow through a process called precipitation. Some of this water flows into the land and collects as groundwater, while the rest drains back into water bodies. That's how the water cycle renews itself. This means water is always available, but in different forms. Around 97.5% of water in oceans is salty. 1.75% of fresh water remains frozen in glaciers and polar ice caps, while the rest, 0.75%, exists as groundwater. We can now understand that the usage of water is more when compared to the availability. But even the available fresh water is fast diminishing, which is a major cause of concern. This happens because of the following three reasons. Human activity results in the loss of forest cover, which in turn reduces the amount of water vapor released during evapotranspiration. Deforestation has also reduced the recharging of underground water. Secondly, a lot of water is diverted for high water demanding crops. Lastly, dumping of industrial and urban wastes into lakes and rivers results in water pollution. These factors are even affecting groundwater reserves. Groundwater is especially important to conserve because of the following advantages. It does not evaporate. It spreads out to recharge wells. It provides moisture for widespread vegetation. It does not create breeding grounds for mosquitoes, and it is relatively protected from contamination of human and animal waste. Therefore, it is very important to manage our water resources well and preserve it. Let us take a look at some ways in which this is done. One of the common methods of water resource management is to build dams. A dam is a structure used to divide and retain water in a particular area. Dams are used to generate hydroelectric power. They are also used for agriculture and in cities through canal systems that transport stored water to great distances. The Indira Gandhi Canal is one of the biggest canal projects in India, which brought greenery to northwestern parts of Rajasthan. Another major benefit of dams is that they help to control floods in an area. Some famous dams in India are the Bakranangal Dam, the Sardar Sarovar Dam, and the Tehri Dam. The Hoover Dam in the US and the Aswan Dam in Egypt are some internationally famous dams. Unfortunately, dams also pose several problems. You may be aware of the Narmada Bachao Andolan. It resists they plan to raise the height of the Sardar Sarovar Dam on the river Narmada. Tehri Dam on the river Ganga is another such example where people are protesting against the construction of large dams. But why the opposition? Let's look at the reasons. Dams are constructed in an area by deforesting the land, thereby causing loss to the biodiversity existing in the area. Further, dams block the sedimentation that rivers carry downstream. This clogs up the dam, making it less and less useful as a water reservoir over time. Finally, storing water in reservoirs changes its physico-chemical properties, which impacts the animal and plant life in the reservoir as well as the river. This is sometimes severe enough to eradicate an entire species from an area. Construction of dams sometimes also has a serious social impact. This is because large number of local villages and tribes are required to be displaced. They are provided rehabilitation and compensation for their losses, which is often not a fair deal. Finally, construction of dams also poses economic problems. Managing water through dams is very expensive. Unless a dam provides proportionate returns in the form of electricity and water supply, it is not worth spending so much money. So you see, dams have several environmental, social, and economic disadvantages. In fact, before constructing these dams, Indians used several environment-friendly small, local methods like watershed management and water harvesting. Watershed management aims for water conservation in order to increase the biomass production. Water harvesting is an age-old concept in India. Water harvesting techniques are named differently at different places, but the use remains the same. For example, they are called khadins and nadis in Rajasthan, bandharas and tals in Maharashtra, bundis in Madhya Pradesh and Uttar Pradesh, ahars and painis in Bihar, and eris in Tamil Nadu. I can take you on a tour of some of these places. Interested? Let's go. Our first stop is a small village in Himachal Pradesh. Here the locals use a system of kuls. A kul is a system of man-made channels that diverts available water from streams to several villages down the hillsides. The benefit of this system is that it causes no damage to the environment. Also, local people manage the kuls themselves and ensure fair and equitable distribution of the water. Our next stop is Kerala. Local farmers here use a system of kattas or low-cost small check dams that are constructed across small rivulets to store water. These are typically made of stones and mud and are dismantled before the monsoons arrive to prevent flooding. Also, since they are built communally, the water is shared equally by all. Let's now move to Karnataka. I want to tell you about another local water management project that involves networked ponds connected through trenches. Because of the slope of the land, the connected ponds are able to feed into each other and irrigate a large area. This system of ponds transformed the dry land of the area to a place that has water available for more than 9 months in a year. The cropping patterns in the region have changed and the amount of yield per year has increased tremendously. Here's another example from Karnataka. Some villagers in Sirsi in northern Karnataka have adopted a simple system of digging trenches on their land to prevent leaching of soil as well as runoff rainwater. Over time, this simple, low-cost method has led to a dramatic increase in the amount of available water, allowing the villages to manage even when the annual rains are delayed. We've talked about a lot of different methods of managing water resources, haven't we? Ha-ho! Looks like the sun is coming out now, which means I'll have to evaporate soon. Before I leave through, I'd like you to meet my friend Carbo. There he is.
In case you haven't noticed, I'm a piece of coal. I'm also fast diminishing. Coal and petroleum are non-renewable sources of energy. This means that they are going to finish sooner or later. Coal was formed hundreds of millions of years ago as a result of the action of heat and pressure on decaying buried plants in the swampy areas of Earth. In fact, this is a continuous process. There are still many areas on Earth where decay and burial of plants may, over millions of years, lead to the formation of more coal. I am very useful. Humans use me as a major source of energy. In fact, 37% of the world's electricity is produced using coal. This is also because coal is cheaper than other fuels like petroleum and gas, which are also non-renewable. However, fossil fuels also have some disadvantages. They contain carbon, hydrogen, nitrogen, and sulfur, which when burned create carbon dioxide, water, oxides of nitrogen, and oxides of sulfur. And when they are burnt with less oxygen, carbon monoxide is formed. A lot of these gases are poisonous at high concentrations. Also, carbon dioxide is a greenhouse gas, which contributes to global warming. Therefore, it is important to use coal and petroleum reserves carefully. Not only are these fossil fuels scarce, they also lead to a lot of environmental hazards. But what other options do you have? There are several other options for generating energy, such as wind, solar, thermal, and hydroelectric energy. These are all viable options since they are more environment friendly. Energy conservation is very important to manage natural resources. Each one of you have a very important role to play in this project of energy conservation. This is because these resources belong to you. If you don't help to conserve them, chances are you and future generations will not be able to enjoy them for long. Luckily, there are several things you can do as individuals to conserve energy. Here are some tips. You can make a habit of recycling and reusing things like plastic bags, bottles, jars, etc. You can try to reduce your consumption of electricity. Switch off lights and fans when you're not using them. You can change your light bulbs to CFL bulbs to save the energy used at home. You can reduce your fuel consumption by taking a bus, cycling, or walking. You can plant trees to help give back what you're taking from the environment. Finally, you can also share your knowledge about energy conservation and try to create social awareness. So you see, if you use coal carefully, you might still see me a few hundred years from now. Goodbye.